afternoon and welcome to the Hillsborough County Transportation Program Workshop. Joined here today virtually. And I'll start off here with a roll call vote, please.
Yes, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. Kemp?
Here.
Cohen?
Here.
Hagan?
Here.
Myers?
Here.
Overman?
Here.
Smith?
Here.
White?
Here.
All right, thank you.
And it looks like everyone's present. And with that, we will go to our County Administrator, Bonnie Wise, to introduce the program today.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We have our transportation workshop today. This is the second transportation workshop. As you might recall, on January 27th, we had our first, and staff provided an overview of the transportation CIP at that time. And we discussed some of the revenue challenges compared to our CIP needs. And some of those CIP projects that we discussed at that time, we're going to further discuss today. Today's focus is going to be on asset preservation. We're going to have another workshop on June 23rd. And on that workshop, we're going to focus on building and improving the system, focused on congestion relief and safety. So John Lyons today is going to speak to the condition of our assets and what is needed to maintain them over a 10-year period. So that's the time frame of which he's going to be focused on today, is that 10-year period. And as a reminder, it's just been a few years since our ad valorem property tax revenues have recovered since the Great Recession. As Kevin Bricky showed us in the budget workshop, multiple core areas of the county's services were affected, including the amount that we've dedicated to maintaining our transportation assets. And because we've had to defer the maintenance of our assets over several years, the additional cost of bringing our assets and our infrastructure back to an optimal level is getting greater and greater. So unfortunately, kind of like your own home, the longer the maintenance is deferred, the more expensive it becomes to restore those failing roads, those sidewalks, bridges to an acceptable condition. As you're aware, road reconstruction costs are significantly more than regular road maintenance. And John's going to go through that a little bit with us and give us some examples. And the cycle becomes unsustainable over time. As our assets decay more, it just becomes more and more expensive over time for that reconstruction. So this situation didn't occur overnight, but a methodical approach to addressing it is what's required at this time. And so we're going to look at that. In prior years, we've utilized some commercial paper to plug the gap, but it's not, as we discussed, a sustainable strategy. We have to repay commercial paper. We have the interest associated with that. So we really need a dedicated funding source to address our asset preservation needs. And it's important to note that once we could catch up and maintain our assets and get them in a good condition, that annual cost is actually reduced over time, ultimately. So in other words, if we had some short-term investment in our asset preservation, that will help stabilize the system and help avoid digging the hole even deeper. So even though asset preservation is a very significant and important part of our strategy, it's only a piece of that. And as I mentioned, on the 23rd, we're going to discuss other mobility improvements, roads, trails, sidewalks, and fixed guideways, and that will be included in that next budget workshop, that next transportation budget workshop. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to John Lyons, Assistant County Administrator, to go through the PowerPoint presentation.
Thank you, Bonnie. Good afternoon, Commissioners. Let me share my PowerPoint. Hopefully everybody can see that.
Yes.
Good.
Yeah.
So Commissioners, this afternoon, I'm going to provide an overview of our assets related to the mobility network the current condition, the inspection and assessment process, and how that information is analyzed to plan for preservation or replacement if appropriate. Our roadways, sidewalks, and bridges are part of an overall mobility system that serves our population. We serve at least the 1.5 million people that are in Hillsborough County, plus those folks that are passing through to visit for whatever other purposes. They provide for commuting, to work and school, recreation, and deliveries of goods and services. Our network is connected to the cities, to the state network, and to the local counties. And this is a large, complicated system that's operated by many entities, and it requires coordination with multiple agencies every day. So here are the major assets that we're speaking to today. As an example, the roads, there's 7,250 lane miles of roadway. And if we were to take a road trip from Hillsborough County, we could go to San Francisco, then on to Seattle, and back the same way, and never drive over the same piece of pavement twice. We have 275 bridges in the system that vary in length from 20 feet to 680 feet. They serve purposes for vehicles, trails, and pedestrian bridges as well. There's over 3,200 miles of sidewalk, 446 traffic signals, and over 3,300 pedestrian crossings at many intersections. We also have 260 school speed zones that we maintain for the public, private, and charter schools, and 63 miles of regional trails. The Public Works core service and mission is to provide for a safe and reliable transportation system for pedestrians, bicyclists, transit, and vehicles. We operate this system 24/7. It supports not only the traveling public, but it also supports responsive fire rescue and law enforcement to different reasons as well. As Bonnie spoke to, in the next workshop, we're going to speak to building and improving the system, which is kind of the third component, kind of the three-legged stool that's in our capital program. In preserving the system, we have a lot of assets, as we just spoke of, and it takes a lot of considerable effort and concentrated planning to execute and preserve the system. Today, we're going to focus on that. And we'll talk about the condition of our system as it is today and what could happen over the next 10 years with different investment options. So asset preservation is the planned, scheduled maintenance of various parts of our network. This includes routine detailed inspection and condition assessment. This information is analyzed to develop a metric-based recommendation for repair and replacement. Pavement is inspected on a 3-year cycle. The bridges are on a 2-year cycle, and sidewalks are in response to citizen calls. The traffic signals are inspected by our operations people because they're routinely doing maintenance to ensure that they operate and function properly. This graphic shows what our budget starts to look like in FY22. Our budget next year will be about $6 million for preservation of these systems. Currently, today, we're spending about $32 to $35 million on average. So we're going to see a significant drop in that without the availability of the commercial paper. Looking at what we need to do over the next 10 years, we really need to invest about $70 million a year to bring the system up to an optimal status. Almost all the roads in the county are constructed of asphalt pavement, and they're categorized by major roads and local roads. These are some of the characteristics of each of those roadways. Major roads many times are multi-lane roads. They have multimodal connections, bus stops, sidewalks. There's higher volumes on these roads, heavier volumes as well, heavier types of traffic, trucks, buses, those type of things. And many of the intersections are controlled by signals. On the local roadways, those are typically 2-lane roads. They could be rural or they could be the neighborhood roads. Lower volumes, typically less heavy traffic on those, and they're typically stop controlled through stop signs. Each of the road segments are broken into segments, and we have about 27,000 segments that are inspected through that 3-year cycle. And during that, the team measures things such as wear, surface wear, rutting, signs of distress such as cracking, patches, and potholes. That information is all plugged into a computer model that results in an overall pavement condition index. About 2/3 of the roads are the local roads, 4680 lane miles, and about 1/3 are the local lane miles of major roads. And the difference between a center line mile and a lane mile is we've broken it down into each travel lane. So as an example, a 4-lane road that's 1 mile long would have 4 lane miles. We're setting targets of at least 50% of the roads should be in good condition, with less than 30% of the roads in poor condition. And we'd like to get to a place where we have no roads in a failed condition. These will result in outcomes of we're preserving the roadway assets, we're extending the useful life, we're also improving the safety of the road. The curve on the right is representative of a single segment of the road. And what it represents is what happens to the roadway over time. And so initially, when it's resurfaced or it's originally built, it stays in pretty good condition for a while, and then it starts to see the wear and tear of vehicles, the environment, all those factors that play into it. It starts to go into a fair to satisfactory category, but as you can see, the slope starts to increase, which means it's starting to deteriorate faster. And then we get to the poor to very poor, and then a serious to failed. And when it gets to serious to failed, there's major reconstruction that typically takes place. Our goal would be for every roadway is to be able to provide pavement treatment at some point where it starts to transition into the poor category. So it's kind of a just in time. So it's almost right there in the middle of the graph between the yellow and the orange where we would really desire to be. And that's usually on about a 20 to 25 year cycle, which means of our total system, we would be repaving somewhere between 290 to 360 lane miles a year, about 4 to 5% of the system. These photos represent just kind of different conditions over time. So you can see the photo on the top left that's a newly repaved road. The striping is fresh, everything looks good. The asphalt is still dark. As you get to the fair to satisfactory, the road has a few years on it now. And so the sunlight is starting to bleach some of the asphalt out of the roadway surface. You're starting to see some wear of the surface, the sand and the gravel that's in there will start raveling away. As you get to poor to very poor condition, you're going to start to see cracks in the road. And those cracks are very important because what those do is they're going to start to allow water to get into the base of the road. And that's bad things start happening at that point. And so somewhere between the fair and satisfactory before we start seeing those cracks is really when we want to provide that treatment to the road. The photo on the right shows where the road has gone to serious to failed. The cracking's gone from linear type cracks to what we call alligator cracking. That's sometimes a reflection of the road base starting to fail where water's intruded upon it. It's also kind of lost the structural integrity of the surface as well. The asphalt does that. So it's flexing and it's starting to break down the structure underneath. Through this inspection and analysis process, the appropriate treatment is selected to preserve and extend the useful life again. Here's a recent example just within the last couple of years on Countryway Boulevard up in the northwest part of the county. We end up going in, it's 4.8 lane miles, so just a little over 2.5 mile long road. We ended up doing full depth reclamation, which is kind of a reconstruction treatment. And we bring in the contractor brings in a mixer and basically mixes the whole road base up and recompacts it, typically adds some asphalt or some sort of other additive to it, recompacts the base and then resurfaces over the top of it. The total cost of that project was about $1.8 million. With the budget, as Bonnie mentioned, with the budget constraints that we've had over the years due to the recession and other factors, we would have liked to have paved that road several years ago. And if we'd have been able to do that, we'd have been able to mill the surface and overlay it at about half the cost. So as you can see, the longer stuff goes, the further it deteriorates and gets into that really bad condition. The cost of fixing it goes up tremendously. We're going to look at each portion of the roadway system now and speak to the local roads because they do deteriorate at a different rate than the major roads. Most of the local roads today, which is the top bar of this graph, represents where we stand today based on that 3-year inspection cycle. So about 16% of the roads are in good condition, 58% in fair to satisfactory, 24% in poor to very poor, and about 2% failed. When we speak to the current funding level, we're taking the proposed FY22 budget, which is about $2.7 million out of the $6.1 million of funding in these categories. We're going to be able to resurface about 14 lane miles of road, or rebuild 14 lane miles of road. As you can see, 10 years from now, the system starts to get in really bad shape. We've seen significant increase in the serious to failed roads, a very significant increase in the poor to very poor, and decreasing in the categories we desire to be in. The ideal funding level is the catch-up proposal. And to do that, we would spend about $25 million a year on local roads and be able to do about 240 lane miles per year. What that does is it brings a significant improvement into the system to where 60% of the roadway is in good condition and only 24% would be in that poor to very poor. And so we would really make a lot of progress on that as well. So these are roadway segments that were identified through the modeling for what would need to be done over the next 10 years at an ideal funding level of $25 million per year or $250 million over 10 years. And we'd be able to knock out about 240 lane miles of the system. Under the proposed funding level, this is what we're going to be able to do, maybe. Only about 14 lane miles on average. On the major roads, this is a similar graphic to the major roads, just as the local roads, that shows where we're at today. So 58 plus 25%, we're in pretty good shape. So about 75% of the system's in good shape. 17% plus 1% in the serious to failed category. At the current funding level, we're only going to be able to do about 9 lane miles per year. And so the system, set in the same manner as the local roads, will start to look really bad and have some serious issues. At the ideal funding level, which would be about $20 million a year, we'd be able to do about 100 lane miles. We would eliminate the failed roads completely, and we would see significant improvements in the fair to satisfactory and the good category. We still have a little bit of a challenge on the on the poor to very poor in this category, but it's a balancing act between taking all the funding in the system for resurfacing and balancing it between the locals and the major roads. So under the ideal level of funding at about $20 million a year, or $200 million over the 10-year period, these would be ideally what we'd be able to accomplish. With the current level of funding, significantly less efforts going in there. The sidewalk repair program, we have 3,200 miles of sidewalk again. What we really want to do is really focus on trying to improve the safety, health, and walkability of the community, and accessibility as well. And the perspective on this is that for about every mile of road, we have about 15% of that has sidewalk issues with either broken sidewalk or the joints have been offset and the panels need to be replaced. And typically these are isolated repairs of about 10 to 12 feet of sidewalk that need to be replaced. With about 15% of that means there's about 60 to 70 locations per mile that need to be repaired. The good perspective on this is that if we can do that, fixing that 15% of the sidewalk makes 100% of the sidewalk safe to traverse in that neighborhood. We have about 2,400 open work requests right now that are actively waiting repairs, some of those dating back to 2011. We typically group those in the neighborhood because it's more efficient. We don't want to, if we did them individually by as old as they are to newest, then we would be moving all about the county to do that. And that's really inefficient. It would cost us a lot of money with the contractors to mobilize. So we typically will look at the oldest request in a neighborhood. We'll aggregate all the other requests, and that'll be the neighborhood that gets tackled first in those cases. So our 10-year sidewalk repair projections is we would like to spend $10 million a year. We'd be able to knock out about 300 miles of estimated sidewalk and replacement and take care of a lot of the neighborhoods around the county. At the current funding level, we're dropping back significantly and we'll be able to accomplish very little over the next 10 years. The bridge, so the bridge program is another component of the system. We have 275 bridges in the system. 254 of those bridges are in the travel network for the roadways. The other 21 bridges are other types of bridges, which would be potentially in parks, pedestrian bridges, the Upper Tampa Bay Trail, etc. We've classified these bridges into, we've consolidated and classified the bridges into essentially 4 types. In the middle picture, the span bridge is typically a longer bridge. It has piling foundation. It's over a waterway, typically a creek or a river or a bypass canal. It's a pretty substantial structure of longer length. Another type of bridge that could be considered would be a culvert, a box culvert in this case. And so under the National Bridge Inspection, the National Bridge Program, anything over 20 feet in length, it could be a combination of pipes or concrete boxes, or these spans would be considered a system bridge that would be inspected. So we have 75 of these culvert type crossings. We also have 2 movable historic bridges, the Platt Street Bridge and the Columbus Drive Bridge in downtown Tampa over the Hillsborough River. Both of those are on county roads and they're our responsibility as well. The lower right is a photo of the Upper Tampa Bay Trail crossing over Gun Highway. Again, that's a pretty substantial bridge for a trail piece, but we work with the Environmental Lands Group to provide inspection services and recommend maintenance as needed on those type of bridges as well. And in the bottom picture, is a recent picture of the Maydell Bridge project over the Tampa Bypass Canal that's under construction currently. And that's the longest bridge in our system at almost 800 feet. That bridge should be finished hopefully by spring at the latest, next spring. So we're setting goals that we're using deck area, and you can see we have 1.1 million square feet of deck area. So similar to the PCI, the Pavement Condition Index that we use for pavement, we use deck area as an indicator of the condition of the bridge. And that's not the single factor of just the deck area. It's a combination of looking at the superstructure, the substructure, foundations, and anything else associated with any of those type bridges. What we want to have a target, which is similar to the DOT, the Florida Department of Transportation, is at least 50% of the bridge deck areas are in good condition and less than 10% of the deck areas are in poor condition. These improve safety and reduce vulnerability. When we work on these bridges, whether it's a major preservation activity or a replacement of the bridge, we're upgrading to new design standards. The Maydell Bridge that we saw in the example, the old bridge, I think, was built in the early 1960s or late 1950s. So it was a pretty old bridge, older design standards in saltwater, subject to a lot of environmental type issues. So we always want to upgrade and provide multimodal network connectivity. The Maydell Bridge didn't have sidewalks before. On this one, it will actually have a bike trail and a sidewalk on both sides of the bridge. Ideally, we would like to have $120 million over the next 10 years for both the major preservation repairs and replacements as well. The current condition of the system it's actually in pretty decent shape. We've got 2% of the deck area, which is in poor condition, which translates to more than one bridge. I'm not sure the exact number, but we can get that information. At the current funding level, we'll see a significant increase of bridges moving from the good to the fair condition, and an increase in the level of poor bridges. At the ideal funding level, we'll have still less in good, but the entire system will either be in a good or fair condition. One thing to say about the bridges, we spoke of the life of the pavement being 20 to 25 years. Typically, these bridges are a 50-plus year structure. So this 10-year snapshot in time, actually, we're expecting that in the next 10 years, 11 through 20, that we would probably need to invest more money in bridge replacements as those older structures are needed to be replaced. Under the preservation portion of the preservation of the repair of it, of that $120 million, we would spend about $57 million over the next 10 years in doing a lot of these type activities you see here. The photo on the left-hand side shows that the flow line of the bridge has been silted in. There's possibility that with all that silting, it causes the water flow to go other places. It could be eroding the side banks, could be undermining the foundation in other areas. So we go in there and look for scour, which would undermine the foundation system of the bridge. Go in and reinforce that, clean the sediment out, and do those type activities. So there's a before and after picture there. The cathodic pile jacket. So this bridge was most likely either in fresh, could be brackish or salt water, but those piles are they're old. And so what happens is the water saturates the concrete, gets into the reinforcing steel. If it's salt water, it starts to erode the structural integrity of the bridge. So the fix on that, in this case, was to jacket the pile with additional concrete and reinforcing steel and provide some cathodic protection against salt water in this case. So what that does is it extends the substructure of the bridge and lets it go for more years then. The picture on the right shows where a wing wall, this is where it transitions from the roadway to the channel itself of whatever water conveyance system it is, was undermined and eroded, and it has a tendency to separate and settle away from the bridge, which could cause other types of problems in the future. So those wing walls would be replaced. And there's not a picture of this, but also for those bridges with concrete decks, those decks can be removed and replaced. They can be chiseled out or water blasted out and resurface the deck to protect it as well. In the case of the pipes and box culverts, which we don't show any pictures here, that you would actually go in and you could be patching in those concrete box culverts, slip lining pipes if appropriate, and doing other types of things to extend the life of the bridge. Also on typically the bridges that are foundations that are in the water all the time, we do have diver inspections on that. I'd like to spend just a second to talk about the bridge inspection program too, because I think it's kind of been something in the news. So on our system bridges, those 254 bridges, the Florida Department of Transportation, as part of the National Bridge Inventory, has a contractor that performs inspection every 2 years on every bridge in the county. We receive a copy of those reports, and we have our own bridge inspectors on the team that go out and look at those. They look at the reports and they go out and re-inspect the bridges at a higher detail level to look at that. That part of that process too is to identify what type of preservation work needs to be done. So we have certified folks, certified inspectors and professional engineers, either under contract or on staff. They're doing a double check on those national inspection standards as well. So that's one reason why our system's in pretty good shape as well. So under replacements, we've identified about 20 bridges that need to be replaced over the next 10 years. And at the ideal funding level, we would spend about 63 out of the 120 million on those replacements. At the current funding level, we wouldn't be able to do any of those bridge replacements. So the traffic signals and intersections, we're going to start a program that didn't exist before. We've done it on a kind of a occasional basis, but we need to start going in and methodically replacing signal poles in a lot of the intersections in the county. And we have a goal of doing, or target of doing that about 5 intersections per year. The reason behind that is many of those poles are old. They were designed under different wind loading standards for hurricanes. And some of the structures themselves, either the metal is starting to crack in the pole and the mast arm, or the concrete is starting to crack away from the reinforcement on the concrete poles that have the wire across the intersections. So this is going to improve our sustainability and resilience, and we would hope to get about $30 million a year over the next 10 years. So we're starting to summarize this now. So this is what 10 years would look like under the IDEAL program. So $250 million for local roads, $200 million for major roads, about $450 million over 10 years for resurfacing. Sidewalks would get $100 million, and this is just in repairs. The bridge repair program would be 120 total in the repair preservation category of 57, and 63 million towards bridge replacements, and about $30 million over pollution signal replacements. If you overlay what our current funding level is for the next 10 years, the math changes on this slide a little bit, and you can see what's represented on those turquoise bars now would be what's the unmet need is. And so that amounts to about $638 million over the next 10 years. Looking at that on a cumulative basis is the same graphic we saw a little bit earlier on this. Current revenue source are fuel taxes. We get about $6.1 million a year right now. Potential revenue options could be another transportation surtax, or the 5-cent local option fuel tax as well. Again, this year we're spending about $34 million on these categories of capital asset preservation. Next year we're looking at about $6 million. Next steps would be the transportation workshop on June 23rd. And also there's the 9-cent fuel tax that is set to expire at the end of this year. And that generates about $5+ million for resurfacing by ordinance, and it would need to be renewed before October 1st to be continuous at this point. And that's the end of the presentation, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
And thank you for that. I only see one commissioner, or Commissioner White had his hand raised. Now I'm not seeing it. I don't know why. Commissioner White.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First, I just want to thank Mr. Lyons. This was an informative presentation. And I was also recently briefed on the citizen survey on growth, which touches on some transportation infrastructure issues. And I found that briefing to be pretty telling with regards to what citizens want to see in terms of appropriation of transportation revenues. John, I have a question, and this is really just out of curiosity more than anything else. And I tried to jot down the slide numbers quickly. I hope I jotted them down correctly. I wrote down 14, 17, and 20. But just out of curiosity, when you take the current funding levels in each of those scenarios and extrapolate it out to the ideal funding levels, how come you end up with a lot less in terms of lane miles?
So we're on slide 14?
Yeah, 14 was the first one I jotted down.
Okay. So
maybe it was the previous.
okay.
Well,
slide 12.
Oh, you know, okay. See how that slide says 12 in the lower right corner?
Yes.
Okay, I wrote down 14.
Okay. So under the ideal funding level, we would be about 240 lane miles. So that'd be about 2,400 lane miles over course.
Yeah, but if you jump ahead to the slide that shows the dollar figures,
Hmm.
I think it's one more slide.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, just doing the math, there you go, the one right
Mhm.
there. Just doing the math very quickly. I mean, if you extrapolate that 2.7 million out, just my quick math tells me that you're at less than 140 lane miles.
Correct.
Why is it that you get a lot more lane miles when you go to the 25 million?
So it's that just in time. It's kind of the example of Countryway Boulevard.
Okay.
So under the scenario when you have very little money, we're going to attack those worst first, and they're going to be more expensive on a cost per unit basis.
Perfect. That makes a lot of sense. Well,
Now,
I really don't have a lot of
majors.
Yeah, I really don't have a lot of commentary at this point, but I think this certainly gives the board something to chew on, though, as we discuss the upcoming budget and, frankly, as we look ahead to conversations about a potential 2022 referendum. So, thank you, John, for a very informative presentation. I learned a lot.
You're welcome.
Commissioner Overman, you recognized?
Thank you. And I'll echo Commissioner White's. That was an excellent presentation, cleared up a lot of questions I had about how we go about projecting funding needs. And I too, when I just run the math based on the total number of roads that we have, I mean, the number for resurfacing in a better than not or ideal circumstance, where we're resurfacing within a timeline that it's actually resurfacing rather than having to rebuild the road. Given the number of roads we have, we're looking at a $1.2 billion expense. I mean, it's a lot. If we were to resurface, schedule resurfacing all of our roads, right, and in the appropriate land over 10 years. And that's just for the roads. That doesn't take sidewalks or, lights and bridges and all the other things. It's just looking at the total roads. But I did want to ask you a question on how we go about taking care of our roads and sharing the cost. Right now you're showing us that there were 4,680 local roads.
Yes.
And then there's 3,200 sidewalks.
Yes.
So I'm trying to figure out, when we're talking about local roads, are we talking about the roads within established neighborhoods that may be in grid format, as well as subdivision neighborhoods that the roads are considered county roads?
Yes.
Okay. And then when a project has been developed, typically we require them to put sidewalks in. Is that correct?
So I think under the current, for the most part, yes, under the current land development rules, they will build the sidewalk with the house. So when the sidewalk's constructed, that's when the house is constructed, that's usually when the sidewalk goes in.
Okay, so I was curious if part of the reason there's a reduction in the sidewalk is because, are we just counting the sidewalks that surround a subdivision and then the subdivision takes care of the sidewalks, or is it just all the sidewalks that are built within all of the divisions that we actually have within all of our counties? Is that?
So I think the easy way to kind of fit a broad general way to look at that, we have about 3,300 center line miles of road. So ideally, if you had sidewalks on both sides of every road, you would have about 6,600 miles of road, just in simple math, or sidewalks, 6,600 miles of sidewalk. You have some of those roads that are like County Road 39, out in the very eastern and rural part of the county that probably will never have a sidewalk on it. And so it's a combination of, there are gaps in the system. There's sidewalks that don't exist in rural areas. There's sidewalks in some areas that exist on one side of the road. But generally speaking, in most of the developed housing developments, subdivisions, there are sidewalks on both sides of the road.
Right. That was what I assumed in some cases and had observed in others. So my question really relates to not only, how do we look about funding this over many years, especially given the magnitude of it, but then how do we also deal with the fact that we've got, an ongoing maintenance cost in roads that aren't necessarily addressing the public purpose. So for example, we have been fighting at least in some respects, fighting the connectivity issue associated with communities that are built. We have a significant number of communities that are, one way in, one way out, communities of a bunch of houses inside of a bag that don't connect to anything else other than 2 major roads, right?
Yes.
Is it correct to assume that those roads that don't connect anywhere else other than inside those communities are the county's responsibility, or are they part of the suburban subdivisions HOA cost of resurfacing and maintenance?
So it's probably not a simple answer on that. So there are private roads within the county, the developments, right, that have private roads that may have sidewalks that we're not responsible for the roadway, the sidewalks, the drainage system, or anything. There are going to be other subdivisions that are dedicated public roads, those contributed assets that we get, which would include the roadways, the sidewalks, all those attributes. In some cases, it depends. The CDDs take care of a lot of the landscaping maintenance. You may have upgraded landscaping that they take care of. They may do some minor repairs because they just do it. And, but for the most part, those are our roads. So pick Linebaugh Avenue where it goes through West Chase. They do a lot of the maintenance of grass and the landscaping and probably a few sidewalk repairs here and there that we don't know about. But if that road needs to be resurfaced, it's a county road and we would be doing that. And so it kind of varies. There's not a simple answer to that.
Right, and that sort of makes my point. That road tends to go straight through a community and connect the rest of the community, right? It's not a one-way in, one-way out road.
Correct.
So I'd love to get an estimate of the number of what you're considering our roads that don't connect to anything else.
Yeah.
Because if that's included in your number, if the private roads are excluded from our responsibility and the communities actually take care of it, because it's considered every single thing other than the road that connects to, say, 41 or 301 or, all the communities that connect to, Lithia Pinecrest, for example, that all have one way in and one way out and don't really want to create another cross section other than a fire road. Those aren't public roads. They're the road for the community. And I'm trying to identify in our numbers, are we responsible for maintaining those roads? And if we are, I don't want it anymore.
Sure, and we are. And we
Okay.
are responsible for those. If they're dedicated to the public, they're our responsibility.
But they're dedicated to the subdivision. So I'm looking at, because they really only address the people who live in that community. They do not connect to others. Now, to your example, yes, that one does, because it actually connects communities. But a majority of the suburban communities that we've developed over the last 10 years do not. And I find that a little challenging that we're left with the bill to fix someone's effective driveway into their community. So I'm looking for a way that we look at this and identify an opportunity, because we still have those communities out there and we're still getting those applications in spite of the fact that we've sort of signaled that we don't want them anymore. But in some cases, it's very difficult because everything around them are those. And so I do recognize that does present a challenge when we're trying to connect a community to an area that has had no connectivity at all to connect to. But when I'm looking at a project that's coming in with little to no connectivity, real connectivity, and designed in such a way that there's no one else that's going to use that road except for the people who live in that community, the way it's designed. I'd like to see if there's a way of approaching a program. I'm trying to understand, and I don't know enough about it, called the VDOT Secondary Road Acceptance Program that, allows us to choose how we choose to accept that. But right now, it seems as though it's just a default that the county has the bill to resurface these roads when it really isn't serving anyone other than that localized community. So because that cost is important, because at the end of the day, it's the citizens in those communities that call us and send us, the request to fix the sidewalk and the pothole and the roads when the CDD may not be able to cover it, or they haven't chosen to deploy those funds that way, especially with the increasing cost of resurfacing.
So we can certainly quantify that. I think there's some big policy decisions there.
Yeah, well, that's what I bring to the table anytime I can. But I'm trying to look for a sustainable funding mechanism here, because like I said, if I look at the number of roads, the miles of roads that you've indicated that we're responsible for, the cost of resurfacing all of those roads today, not increased cost, but today is, $1,268,750,000. And with our current funding strategies, there's just not any way we can get close to that. And that means that we could all do it today. If we had to try to do it over a 10-year period, that number would escalate just with the cost of inflation. So, and the time delays and labor costs and all the things that we have to deal with. But I really appreciate you sort of bringing the total dollar. And I appreciate that there's a short-term funding strategy that we do need to consider, because hopefully, we can partner with state and federal resources for building our infrastructure that has been underfunded on a national level for a lot. For those roads that are big roads, like you said, the larger roads, but it doesn't address our policy on the local road issue when a community hasn't got connectivity to serve what I define as a public benefit. So I do believe we need to look at that in our policies, and I'll stop there. Thank you.
Commissioner Smith, you're recognized.
Thank you. And Commissioner Overman, I was nodding along enthusiastically with you. I'm having the same thoughts. When I think about this $700 million program over the next 10 years, looking at each of those bar charts that shows, where we'll be if we don't spend the money, where we'll be if we do spend this ideal $70 million a year, it doesn't catch us up. I mean, we're not, all the roads aren't fine and good and green condition at that point. We are far ahead. We would be far ahead of where we are now, but we're still in the hole 10 years from now after $700 million. So, I mean, it is, it's certainly smart money. I get the point that, we do need to try to catch up, but this, it's important to note that this still leaves, quick look back says, after the 10 years, we will have 50% of our major roads in good condition and still have 23% of them in poor to very poor condition. And the local roads will have 24% still in poor to very poor condition. This, I take it without flipping back through all of them, it gets us to a state where we don't have serious to failed roads. But we still have poor and very poor conditions after 10 years of major spending. And so if we are this far behind, we need to consider some new ways of doing things so we don't keep digging ourselves into the hole at the same rate while we're trying to get out of the hole. And it may take some different new policy decisions to keep above water, and or to, you know, to help, and thinking about ways to reduce the roads that we take on, and add to this program, and add to our maintenance cost is, you know, absolutely necessary and the next step. And I think the first place to look is these roads that have very little public benefit and provide no connectivity, and possibly that's a land development code amendment or something. But I think we could make policy that says, if you're building and designing a new subdivision, and you have roads that connect out on both ends to our road network, so that the public can drive through and provide that connectivity and provide that alternate route to other congested routes. If you're doing that, that's a road we can all use. We'll take that on. But those roads that you have in your subdivision that do not connect on both ends, that only end up in some cul-de-sac, you're on your own for that. Your HOA, your CDD is on your own. And I would very much like to see staff bring us some kind of policy consideration for doing that. I think it would help to encourage the connectivity that we keep getting some pushback for, and also help with this spending deficit that we have, and prioritize our spending for those roads, spending of the public tax dollars for those roads that have the most public benefit. The other thing to think about is, as far as policy that can help slow the rate of digging us into this hole of taking on roads for maintenance, is, of course, slowing down sprawl and directing growth into infill, transit-oriented development, urban core, walk with alternate forms of transportation, taking some wear and tear and traffic off the roads. The more we spread out beyond the urban service area, past Balm and Waimama, the more roads, you know, those are country rural roads that suddenly end up with tens of thousands of trips per day on them, and need to be brought up to urban standards, and become very expensive additions to this list of spending deficits. So those are the two things off the top of my head that can help slow down the rate at which we add on deficits to this list. Thank you.
Thank you. At this time, I don't see other hands up, so I will just,
Madam
in
Chair,
some ways,
Madam
yes,
Chair, it's Commissioner White. I had raised my hand a second time, but
I see.
Yeah, but I'll defer to you and be recognized when you're finished, if that's okay.
Okay. I'll just say, this isn't, it's comprehensive. It isn't too shocking. And I was told sometime back that our maintenance needs would be about 25 million a year, all inclusive. But what this says is it's 70 million a year. It's as if nothing we could do already at this point, even if it comes down in the future, because we do better on target maintenance. But as we're doing that, we're adding more roads into our system. So while I'm thinking there's not much legal recourse in terms of what we've accepted in the past, as Commissioners Overman and Smith have said, there might be policy for the future in some of the ways that are suggested. It's kind of funny that we call the roads assets. I realize they are, but from the moment we take possession, they become liabilities. And every year it becomes something that we're going to have to start adding up to pay for. If a bridge costs, or a road or something costs 25 million to replace in 25 years, we need to put aside $1 million every year for that part of the replacement. At this point, from what I saw, we were getting, and people talk about gas taxes paying for what we have. We're getting, I think, $6.1 million a year in gas tax revenue. Is that correct?
Commissioner, that's a portion of the gas tax that goes into the capital program. I think Kevin's on the line here, and he could probably describe it in a little bit more detail.
Yes, could you, because as I see it, I saw the 6.1 million up there, and then I saw for the gas tax dollars, and then but even to do this program at this time is 70 million. So there's a huge gap there. Could you, what besides what we're just paying in general revenue for road maintenance, what are we looking at there?
Currently, as far as this is Kevin Bricky, good afternoon, management and budget. Currently, going into the capital improvement program for resurfacing, bridges repair, and sidewalk repair is the $6.15 million that Mr. Lyons identified. We have 4 field tax revenues. The balance of those field tax revenues in FY21, that was $41.6 million, goes to the operating side of Public Works transportation program, which includes mowing of right-of-way, minor repair of sidewalks, tree trimming, that sort of thing.
Which are definitely needed. So we put about right now from our gas taxes about $6.1 million a year into our asset preservation, but we need 70 million. That's correct? That's accurate.
Yes.
From what we're seeing now. Okay.
That is the amount.
Because that's a huge gap, and as we saw over a 10-year period, it does nothing but grow, and that's if without adding another thing right at this moment. So I think one of the identified things is to make sure too that when we accept roads, what is the, are we accepting roads for one? One of the things is connectivity as a condition. Secondly, are these roads that are put out or built by private developers, which we're taking all the time, do they have to meet the conditions that they would have if we were to build that ourselves?
So, Commissioner, the answer to that question is that if it's a local road, we don't build those local roads like in a subdivision, and so those are typically built to a different standard that's established by the Transportation Technical Manual through the Development Services process. If it's a major collector road like Waterset Boulevard, that would be built to the roadway standards that we build our capital projects to.
Thank you. I think maybe I'm not, so familiar with that, but I think that might be another area that I'd like to look to just to see, so that we don't take on a road, that's built and is falling apart in just, 5 or 10 years, and just make sure that we have that before as also another condition of acceptance of responsibility for a road. I think we do have to look at anything more we take on. I also think that we have to be more careful about what we're spending on projects. And frankly, that is what I was bringing up last week, because if we can build and do a road project for 40 million, that brings all the same benefits in terms of our Vision Zero, and in terms of we to put in these, I don't know what, and require all acquisition of this expensive right of way, I think is adding on to our costs, and we obviously can't afford to do that with new roads because we're just talking about asset preservation here, and to me that's a first consideration. But the other is, there's been a little talk, Commissioner White, I know that you raised it about tax and the survey, and I don't know that we can guarantee that will be there or what will be there. And I know that the gas tax was the last slide shown here. I'd like to know from if we were to do an interim gas tax or something like that, I'd like to know from commissioners here, Commissioner Hagan, Commissioner White, would you support something like that in lieu of the tax for right now?
Madam Chair, if I have the floor to answer that question, I would have to see more specifics in when just to be clear, when you said we don't know whether or not that would be there, you're referring to a potential new transportation tax, right?
Yes.
Yeah, but what we do know, however, and what we can tell the public with certainty is what the county commission would commit to in terms of appropriation of those dollars in the event that the tax does pass. And, I think this particular presentation and some of the things that I saw in the citizen survey on growth have been very enlightening for me and very telling with respect to what a proposed spending plan should and should not look like. But I'm definitely interested in having the conversation in terms of what the additional tax, gas tax would mean and bring to the table. I mean, it's labeled by the legislature as a tax, but it really looks a lot more like a user fee and really, takes the shape of a user fee. Interestingly enough, I've seen where some local governments are beginning to levy some sorts of fees on electric vehicles because, they have impacts on our roads, but yet they're not paying that gas tax at the gas pump. So, I'd be interested in looking at equity there as well as we're having that conversation.
Yeah, I don't even know if we're how that would work without the state doing something. But
well, I have been told by staff that we have a lot more flexibility with respect to fees versus taxes. Whether or not we could institute some sort of an electric vehicle fee, I don't know. That's a question that would have to be answered. But yeah, I'm willing to have that conversation. And when I have the floor again, I have a few more things I'd like to say.
okay, you're recognized you can say whatever right now.
Great. Well, Commissioner Overman, I think you've hit the nail on the head with respect to these roads with a lack of connectivity. I don't think we can do any retrofitting on that issue, unfortunately, but we have a lot of uncharted territory, and the lion's share of it is in my district. So we certainly have an opportunity to shape policy looking forward. Look, the fact of the matter is that people love to live on cul-de-sacs. They love to live on quiet roads without a lot of traffic, myself included. And I'm all for, a policy trajectory that would say that that's fine. If you're going to build out a community like that, that's okay. But you're going to have to make those roads private. We do have to recognize, though, that if that's our policy position, the CDD or the HOA that's granted control of that community in the end would have the right to gate that community and keep, not only cars, but bicycles and pedestrians out of there as well. That can be a double-edged sword. My family and I have chosen to live on a private lot out in the suburbs. That means that when we go for a walk, we get out and we go into some of the surrounding neighborhoods and walk through those neighborhoods. If we had a policy that would require those types of neighborhoods to have private roads and private sidewalks, that could turn into a situation to where they're all gated. That's okay. I just wanted to throw that out there as an anecdote, though, of an example of a type of thing that we would want to think about. I do see that Greg is on the call, and I only call out Greg by name because Development Services is now under his span of control. So I just want to ask, and I don't need an answer now, but if you can just let the board know in some sort of a fashion, an email, a memo or whatnot, I'd like to know if we can make the privatization of roads a zoning condition under our current policies. And if not, I would like to see the board receive some advice on potential policy initiatives to address that issue, because I think it's clear today that we have consensus for that and that it's something that the board would likely support. And interestingly enough, if the board were to take that trajectory from a policy perspective, it could potentially actually strengthen private property rights. We would essentially be saying that if you want to maximize your density, that's fine. You have that right, but you do not have the right to impose a burden on the taxpayers for a bunch of roads that have a lack of connectivity. So I think we could put ourselves in a situation to where the board might be more likely to say yes to some rezonings, but with the understanding that we just cannot continue to further burden the taxpayer like we have over the course of the past several decades. And I love these conversations, by the way, because we have a fresh new administration in place. We have a lot of new faces on the board. None of us really own this problem. It's not Bonnie's fault. It's not Greg's fault. It's really not the fault of any of these board members on this board. So, we can just take a fresh new approach, a new trajectory, especially as we begin to look to those uncharted territories, in the outstretches of the county. And we're very, very close to looking like a Pinellas County. And frankly, I hope from a development perspective that we never end up being a Pinellas County. I was just speaking with some planning commission staff the other day, and they said, look, our comp plan is clear that we want to have a diversity of housing stock, from urban to suburban to rural. And I think we have some exciting policy initiatives that we're working on that'll get us there and bring us in for that soft landing. But would certainly love to look at this issue of privatization of roads. And it's going to do one of two things. It's either going to direct developers into a situation where they're finding ways to create connectivity, or it's going to recognize that there's a premium that goes along with cul-de-sacs and quiet, low traffic roads and things like that. So that's my 2 cents worth.
Great, thank you. And Commissioner Overman.
Thank you. Very good comments so far, and I truly appreciate it. I wanted to ask a couple of questions, and then and really do have that conversation about where we go forward and how we grow forward and how we address the communities of which we're concerned about. And Commissioner White, if we've not seen that survey that you were referencing, it'd be great if you could share it with all of us, because that might help us with understanding each other's perspectives. So that would be terrific. I may have been the other survey that I did see recently, but I wanted to make sure I saw the same thing. But I want
Madam Chair, Madam Chair, may I just answer to that quickly?
Sure.
Yeah, it's my understanding that all 7 commissioners are scheduled for a briefing on that. I just, just because of my calendar schedule, ended up being one of the, first or second in line. But it's my understanding that all 7 of us are in line to receive that briefing.
Right. I think it's the same survey that I did see a survey recently. I just want to make sure it's the same one, where we had a significant number of people who all believe they lived in suburbia when actually our land code is really considered rural. So it's, they were living in the suburbs, but our land code really holds that area as being a rural area. So I do think it's important for us to build to what our, consumers and citizens and developers are building to, but also being very clear what level of services we provide. Recently, we were talking about water services and solid waste services, and all the services we're now wrestling with how to rate and why we have to raise fees, because we're providing services at an urbanized level in areas where the structure that we're providing the service is not urban or not able to be urbanized, because of the lack of connectivity or the fact that it's, further out in a rural area or an area that would traditionally be considered rural, but we've now suburbanized it. So I think it's important for us to take a look at that. But the reason I raised my hand again is I wanted to get some clarity on the revenue issue as far as the projections that are discussed on slide 28. The fuel tax that's referenced of the 61.5 million projection over 10 years, is that the 9th cent, or is that our current fuel tax, including or without the 9th cent? And maybe Kevin Berkey needs to assist me in that one. I just want to make sure I understood it correctly.
Yeah, those are from our current fuel taxes, and I believe the bulk of it is indeed the 9th cent.
Okay, so if we renew in October the 9th cent, that's where that revenue source lies, correct?
Correct.
Okay, and then if we were to add on take advantage of the 5 cent local fuel option, is that an addition or is that our current?
That's addition. The second local option fuel tax is a 1 to 5 cent fuel tax. We do not levy any of it currently.
Well, that would seem, in my opinion, sort of, not to insult anybody, but that's a no-brainer. If what we're doing is making sure preserving the roads that we have the responsibility to, and the reason we have to do that is because it's being driven on, and the source of how that happens is fuel. It would seem as though that would be a responsible way of actually getting the 172 million of the 700 million we need. And then obviously adding the 9th cent to that will definitely help. It doesn't get us all the way there. So in the slide 20, when you talk about the revenue options for the 1% surtax, and the estimated revenue source for that 10-year projection is being $980 million of the county's share, is that based on the previous surtax formula?
That is based on the entire share that would come to the county. Based on the previous sharing formula that the county and the cities receive 54%, and our share is of that, in turn, is about 73%. So that would be our entire distribution.
So the entire amount for what we previously had coming to the county would be allocated to asset preservation and no other effort such as Vision Zero or safety or additional sidewalks or connectivity or any of those kinds of things. Is that correct?
I think I'll defer to John Lyons to speak on that.
That's why I asked while both of you were here. Thank you.
It's, I guess there's a couple different ways you could approach it. So if you took the 6.1 million per year that we had, or the 61.5 with the existing fuel taxes, that's kind of a baseline. If we were to put the 5 cents on, I think that generates close to $18 million. So I'm going to use simple numbers on this. So that gets us up to $24 million per year. If we were to get the surtax, a portion of that then could go to fill up that gap. So the difference between 70 and 24 million is what, 27, I think, if my math is right. So you need about 47 million of the 98 on an annual basis to get this caught up.
Okay, so let do me a favor. If we could take a look at slide 28, and if you could do
Sure.
that on the 10-year projection example that's used, I'd like to understand, based on what we're talking as far as asset preservation, what percentage of the 1% surtax that you're showing here as revenue is needed to, I mean, should I just only pull 600,000 from the 10-year number that says 980? And the rest can go for everything else we need to do? I'm just trying to make sure I'm clear using the example you're showing.
I'm going to do some quick math here. If I do it in my head, that's usually going to be wrong.
And John, maybe you could put up that last slide too,
Sure.
that everybody could be looking at it.
Yeah, if you could, if you don't mind, please, that would, I think will help everyone understand where I'm going with this.
All right.
Just to understand, so.
Here we go.
I think that would be helpful. And then two, I also as the reminder, these aren't exactly, perfect numbers. These were also mostly to show
Right.
magnitude.
Yes, that one. Mhm.
That one.
That one. Mhm.
And so what you have there is 980 million 10-year projection county share, as if that 980 million is totally what we'd get if the sales tax were here now, and 700 million would be used for asset preservation. So you're saying 280 million of that would be left each year for other needs within the county's road program.
Plus the revenue.
Road, sidewalk,
Yeah.
trail.
But also if you had the gas tax. So we wanted to show you the magnitude of each of those revenue sources, so you can just kind of put it in perspective to see what options you may have. As you mentioned, it was under the existing formula. And also the other reminder is this would help us get caught up in the 10-year period. After the 10 years, our assets would theoretically be in a better condition, as we discussed, and wouldn't require that same $700 million number. That same amount annually. We would be in a better condition as we maintain the system. But we do need that catch up.
Assuming this system doesn't continue to expand at the rate that it is. So that's, and we don't have 100% of the liability, as Commissioner Kemp mentioned, that, we call this assets, but for all practical purposes, they're actually maintenance liabilities that we take on when we maintain the program. So so basically the 700 million is over and above the 61 for the current fuel tax, correct?
No, it's the grand total.
It's the current total. Okay.
Yeah. So what would need? So if you take the 638.5 that's represented in there, that's the gap with including the existing gas tax or fuel tax. So the 700 million minus 61.5 gets you to the 638.5. If you were to have the 5 cent local option fuel tax, you would subtract 172 million from the 638.
Which would get us to 808, correct?
It leaves you
Right.
466 million of gap then.
Mm-hmm.
So you have 466 in gap, or about 46 or 47 million dollars annually.
Okay.
That would have to come from the transportation surtax.
Mhm.
So you would take about 46 million of the 98 to fill that gap over 10 years. And I think, you know, a lot of this projection is that, and it kind of goes back to an earlier statement, if we look at the just in time, if we got to a place where we were just in time, going back to the Countryway example, we could save significant money on preserving the system by being able to invest at that level and do those type preservation techniques. There's other techniques out there that, you know, gets a little bit more complicated in the system. I know the slurry coat that was put on back in the mid 2000s, you know, it has a bad name to it, but there are other pavement treatments that are, once you have a good pavement, that you can preserve it. And it's like those little 5 or 6 year bumps where you kind of extend the life by making minor investments, but that's a little bit more complex. I think the other thing that plays in this as well is as we get into bridge replacements, you know, bridges are kind of one of those things that the federal government recognizes through the National Bridge Inventory, and they have a tendency that we do receive some grant money on occasion for those. And so we're always pursuing grants and other funding sources. There's been cases, and it comes far and few between, that we even use CBDG money to build sidewalks or to resurface roads in those qualifying areas as well. So it's not a single toolbox that we use. It's a multifaceted approach. But you know, we're looking in the seat cushions all the time for revenues or funding to be able to work on these projects.
Right. Right. That's what I assumed and had encouraged is to look. We've got multiple sources, but at the end of the day, if asset preservation and the long-term funding, assuming no additional roads to our network, which is a really huge, gigantic assumption given our current pattern, you know, this is a minimum number that we need to plan for. So, being financially responsible and making sure we're taking care of the assets that we do have a liability to do, we do have to actually take a look at where we can develop those funding sources on a reliable basis, and then so that we can complement granting and other federal resources or state resources that we can partner with for those kinds.
So I think even on the Maydell project, we had about $6 million of state money in that project.
Mm-hmm. That's always handy.
Yes.
Thanks. All right, thank you.
Okay, I don't see any other hands up. So with that, I guess we're adjourned. Did you have some comments, Ms. Wise? No?
No, I just really wanted to thank you all for your attention. It is a complicated matter, and we truly appreciate your attention. Thank you.
Thank you.